Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at how we can actually write a custom function in Oracle and see how that works, go over the process of actually writing it, identify the syntax and how to work with that. We're going to take a look at the syntax first, look at how the actual pieces are put together, and then we'll use that syntax example to actually build an actual query that we could use to identify something in the world based on a database we're working with here in class. So let's take a look at what we can do with this. Now, the first thing I want to identify that when you're working with functions and creating these functions, because create is a role limited thing, how you can actually operate this is going to be dependent on the role you have. So if your role that you have as a user in that Oracle database system does not give you create function permission, you won't be able to actually test this code out, but this is something that would be a great thing to do, especially as you're working through and looking at how to have a deep understanding of working with databases. So we'll go ahead and take a look and see how we can actually go through this and actually take a look at the stuff that's inside here. On screen now, you can see we have the actual create function syntax. This is a demo example, so we can break down all the pieces right here and see what's actually going inside that. And so again, we have with the create or replace. And so I'm using the or replace optional modifier on the create statement. So it's like, oh, if it's already there, let's replace that existing value because we want to make sure we have the latest version of that function with this name for our user specifically specified on that. So I use the or replace as a good idea for practice on that, making sure you're replacing the current version of that when you're working on there. And then function name. Now I use the snake case notation when we're working with this, and so you describe the name of that. And so snake case works really well because you can always easily read that and it parses out really well. Since Oracle's not case specific, and depending on how you're implementing that, it makes it really easy to identify what's doing. Again, as always, when you're talking about function names, the function should describe the purpose. It's really critical that you do this. So that's one of the things right there. As you work within that, you have your parens, then you have parameter types, and then you separate your parameter types with commas. So I have parameter and then type, and then a separated by a comma and another type. Now, of course, type is not a keyword, which gives us the lovely red line of doom over there. We'll see here in just a minute, but that's what I do. So any parameters we need for that function would be specified inside that parameter block right after the function name. The next line is the return type. And again, type is not a data type in Oracle, so it's going to be like, I can't handle this. But you would put the actual return type in here so you could specify what you're returning back from that function. That's what we're going to be putting inside with this. Then we have the actual function declaration structure. We have the begin and end, followed by our great friend, the semicolon, to end the actual function declaration right there. So I have the outermost level of the indentation. Again, I use indentation in this to make sure you can easily see where the things belong. And so that outermost level is at begin and end. That's the same level as that create or replace function right there. Inside the begin block, we have our declaration of a return variable. So you have to have a variable you're going to return and work with. And so we have declare variable name and then that type you're working with right there. And so that's where we're going to specify which return variable and any other variables you might need in that first block right there. Then at another level of indentation, we have the query that's going to be done for that actual functionality. And so one of the things you do with a function is you have to return a single value because a function, just like in Mathland, gives you a single value. And because it gives you a single value, we need to have a variable we can store that into. And so one of the things we do with that is when you're working with this, you're looking at using either a scalar subquery or a aggregate function to grab a single value into a single thing. And so of course you can have multiple subqueries on there, but you want to get down to one single value to actually get that in there. And so however complex your select part is, great, wonderful, put that in there. And then it's going to be, before we get the from clause, we're selecting into the variable name. So we're specifying where the data from the select is going to be directed to. So this guy can say, for example, you're assigning it to that variable. I know, craziness. Then we have our standard from/join on clauses. And you can see right here I have from source SOU. Again, always using a nice alias so we can do any complex notation we have to do within that. And so we can have that right there. And I have my field name that would be working with that, so it would be specifying that information. And then where, and I'm going to use my limitation function right here, parameter is equal SOU.fieldname. So, I'm going to match it right here on this. And you can see right there with the alias of SOU.fieldname, I can have that matching of the data I'm working with against the parameter that's sent in by my function call. Then I return, and then in parens, I specify the variable name that I declared up above in that declaration section, specifically for this structure. So that's where we're working for with that. And so we have that right there, and then we have semicolon into the return block again. And finally, we have our end statement we just talked about earlier for that outermost level of the thing. And of course, ending with our great friend, the semicolon. So let's take that information right here of how to write that syntax, the structure of that, and let's use that for an actual example so we can create a function that we can actually do this. And so the way we're going to do that, let's think about how we can actually make a function that can count the number of students who score above a certain point on a specific type of assignment. So think about that for a minute before we actually proceed. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and do that. But think about how we could actually get that information from a database. Okay, now you've thought about that, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So I have my create or replace function, count students above cutoff. Oh, that's pretty much explains exactly what we're doing. And then I have I have parens, and a first parameter, cutoff, is number, and then a score type is a varchar too. So I can explicitly call, oh, here's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to compare based on a number and a string parameter or a text parameter I'm using to actually look at that. And this is going to return a number. Pretty obvious because I'm counting the number of students. Oh, so in my first part right there of the actual statement, I'm clearly indicating what's going to happen inside that. Okay, now we have inside our inside the actual function declaration, we have our declare and return the actual structure of our query we're working with. And so I declare the count number of students, which is a number. That's the one I'm working with for the actual function of that. Notice I'm ending that with our great friend, the semicolon, and then I return counted students and the semicolon to actually return the value from that. Then you can see that I have my query I'm working with that. And so again, you're thinking about how to process that. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So the first thing we're going to do is the select clause. And so we look at the select clause, I'm going to do count star as students with grade. Now again, I always make sure, even when I'm doing things that are going to be not accessed directly, I want to make sure I use good programming practice. I alias all of my function-based fields so it's easy to read and understand, no matter if it's not going to be, because again, when I test out inside my, to demo my query, I want to make sure I understand it right there. I don't want to have that count star or any other information exposed, a good information hiding practice, but also it's good to actually structure, make it so it's easy to work with, just in case you need to use that information later on. So count star as students with grade, because we're counting things. Makes it pretty obvious right there. And then into, again, is going to specify that field we just defined up above. So I have my counted students field right there. Makes a lot of sense that we're using that with there, so good. Into counted students. My from clause, and as you can see, I'm joining some information. So I'm going to go from students STU. I'm going to join my assignment score table, A score, using that alias right there so I can tell those two tables apart. And then on, I'm going to match the A score's student ID to the student's student ID, making sure I have a direct match between those values. And then my where clause, hey, this is where I'm going to be able to use the information from my parameters to limit my results so I get the right number of information. And then I have my a score.score is greater than cutoff, and the score type is assigned the same value as the a score.assignment type ID. So I'm matching the values from the parameters to the fields inside the database, so I can actually grab that information. And finally, I return that information to counted students, and then I end my query again right there. So that's how we can actually work with doing a created function in Oracle. I hope this is a helpful example for you to understand the syntax and actual example of the code for that. Try this out in your own databases or your stuff you're working with. I'm hoping to be very helpful. If you're working with other languages, you're going to just have to do some modifications. Check out my video for how to do this in MariaDB/MySQL to see how you can do it with a different open source database as well. I hope this is helpful. Cheers. See you next time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.